The Eagles dominated the Jaguars on the ground due to a combination of scheme, execution, and the Eagles players just being an unstoppable force. Here are 3 plays the Eagles used to bully the Jags. The Jaguars came into the game with an extra emphasis on playing with split safety structures, which is pretty understandable when you have 2 top 10 receivers on one team. This resulted in them trying to defend the run with light boxes. Contrary to popular belief, defending the run with light boxes doesn't mean you can't be gapped out against the run, meaning every gap is accounted for by one defender. For the most part, the Eagles still stay gapped out, they just have a safety coming down late, which often results in them becoming an unblocked defender that the offensive line didn't account for. But the Jaguars decided they were going to try to defend the Eagles' run game playing down a gap, which is a decision. In order to do that, the defense has to get creative and try to use different gap canceling techniques. We see a good example of this from the Jaguars here. The nose tackle, aligned as a shade on the outside shoulder of the center, and the linebacker are responsible for defending these 3 gaps. The linebacker is essentially 2-gapping. Notice how he doesn't immediately fly downhill. He's executing a technique often referred to as stack, track, and fall back. The linebacker stacks in his initial gap, tracks the path of the running back, and falls back when the running back cuts back. Now look at the shade nose tackle. Notice what happens when the center releases to combo block with the guard. The shade occupies a space that the center vacated, and now he's essentially closed off 2 gaps. Also notice that the defense aligned their other defensive tackle in the B gap opposite of the running back. This is on purpose. They want to build a wall with these 3 defensive linemen and force the run to cut back, making it easier for the 2-gapping linebacker to anticipate the cutback. With the scene set, let's discuss the first run concept. The Eagles come out in pistol, which makes it harder for the defense to determine where to set the front, especially considering they were setting the front based on where the back aligned. I can make a whole other 30-minute video about why teams do that, but that's for another time. First, I want to note, the Jags try to show that they're going to be playing single high coverage, but it's just a disguise as we see the safety bail at the snap. Second, the Eagles game plan to attack this relationship between the shade and sack linebacker all day. When Jalen sees the defense has set up in an underfront with the shade aligned to the running strength, he checks into a zone read to the weak side, as you can see from the offensive linemen all flowing away from the run strength. And the beautiful thing is that running inside zone from pistol results in a much more downhill attack. It varies by team, but the aiming point for the back is usually anywhere from the front side hip to the backside hip of the center. We see Cam Jurgens and Mekhi Becton send this defensive tackle into the shadow realm, with Lane Johnson releasing up to the linebacker. The offense knows he is playing a stack, track, fallback technique, and he's going to run right back into Lane. Saquon knows this too, so even though there's a wave of Kelly Green in front of him, he trusts that the seas will part and stays on his path for an 11-yard gain. I'll throw in an extra play. Later in the game, the Eagles come out in the same formation, but this time the Jaguars set up in an overfront with the shade aligned away from the run strength. Even though Jalen can't read defenses, he somehow recognizes the front, gets up to the line, and checks into another inside zone play, but this time they're running to the strong side. As you can see, the offensive line flowing to the run strength. The goal is to get a double team on the shade, but instead of running zone read and releasing the tackle to the fallback linebacker like we saw in the last play, they don't tag the option to the play call. This is probably to ensure Saquon gets the ball. Nevertheless, the combo block by the guard and center pushes the defensive tackle into the linebacker's lap, and he can't execute his fallback technique properly. Okay, I lied. One more play. Notice how these 2 plays we looked at are from a 3-by-1 formation with a tight end as a solo player on the backside, and the number 3 receiver running a bubble route to pull defenders out of the box. To add in a little disguise, the Eagles align Devontae Smith in the backfield and then send him on a motion to the left before reversing back to the opposite side. This formation ends up looking very similar to the plays we just looked at, with Devontae pulling a defender out of the box with the bubble. The option element holds the defensive end, paving the way for Lane Johnson to release up to the linebacker, while we see Mekhi Becton doing Mekhi Becton things. This video is actually sponsored by BetterHelp. If you're a defensive tackle that has been traumatized by Mekhi Becton, just know that you're not alone, and there is help waiting for you once you retire. Unfortunately, Cam and Lane don't do a good job sealing the backer, or else this 7-yard gain turns into another big play. Either way, the Eagles dominated the run by dominating the shade fallback relationship. The second play we're going to look at is sponsored by Johnson & Johnson. We see Lane and Fred run into each other, and it still results in a gain of 13 yards where Saquon isn't touched until 7 yards down the field by a defender stumbling backwards. So how did this play work despite poor execution? Well, let me set the scene again. When the Eagles came out in 2-by-2 formations, as opposed to the 3-by-1 formations we just looked at, the Jaguars often opted to contain the read option game from the Eagles by executing a scrape exchange technique. Instead of having the defensive end to the side of the running back use a surf technique when he sees the tackle block away, where the goal is to have the defensive end contain the quarterback and force him to hand the ball off, they have the defensive end crash down inside on the running back. The linebacker is going to be the quarterback player. The hope for the defense is that the quarterback sees the defensive end attacking the back, giving the quarterback a read to pull the ball while the linebacker loops around unblocked. The second time the Eagles came out in their formation with Devontae aligned in the backfield, the Jaguars opted to play single high coverage and execute the scrape exchange technique, and we see what happens when the quarterback hands the ball off. Also notice how the defense aligning with the tackle in the B gap gets the backside guard and tackle to make a call to combo block on the defensive tackle. This allows the defensive end to run free at the back. Looking at the previous play, because the defensive tackle is now aligned in the A gap, Fred Johnson can get a hand on the end and disrupt him from crashing down on the back. It only went for 2 yards, but that's 4 yards better than the previous play. So back to the play from Johnson and Johnson. After half, the Eagles decided to put an end to all this scrape exchange action going on. They run dart, which is a gap scheme run where they pull the tackle to the opposite side. The goal is to have Fred Johnson pin the defensive end inside as he naturally crashes down on his own during the scrape exchange, while Lane Johnson pulls around to kick out the linebacker. In the future, Fred should foot fire immediately in his stance instead of getting depth like he does here. That way he'll be in a better position to prevent penetration and flatten out the path of the defensive end crashing inside. The play works anyway, because it was called to counter what the Jags were doing. Guess who stopped scrape exchanging after this play? The final play we're going to look at is this jet sweep to Ainias Smith that went for 2 yards. The play wasn't well executed by Ainias or Lane Johnson, and there was some confusion from the Jags defense that probably aided in that as well. But what's really important is that it set up a play for later. The threat of the jet sweep hitting to the flat quickly often forces defenses to react to motion differently than they might typically. Here the Jaguars are playing single high coverage and opt to bump their second level defenders over a gap with the motion. This now moves a linebacker out of his A gap run fit and moves a safety into that A gap run fit. And because the Eagles are using fast motion and then running outside zone back into the direction that safety was sliding from, he's now confused on where he should be fitting. The run fits are blown, Mekhi Becton continues his unchecked streak of abusing defensive tackles, and Saquon goes untouched for 15 yards. What's also important is that the motion and previous jet sweep we saw forces the linebacker to bump over a spot and pause before reacting. This gives Fred Johnson better leverage and angle to climb to the second level. Later, we see why trying to get the safety into and removing a linebacker out of the run fit is crucial. This is the 4th time the Jags have seen this action by now, so the linebacker is faster diagnosing the play, but linebackers are better at knowing their run fits, better at defeating blocks, and better tacklers than safeties are, generally speaking. In the future, if they don't get the second level bump like they're anticipating, I think we'll see Barkley try to hit the cutback lane. Finally, I will also mention that duo was a huge play call for them in this game as well, but these plays piqued my interest the most. We'll see how the Eagles continue to build on their ground game as the season rolls on.